Hello, I'm Ivor Blumenthal. Welcome back to Contemporary Business. This podcast asks the following question. Did South Africa's Department of International Relations, which is commonly referred to as DIRCO, meet with Hamas before October the 7th, 2023, literally to plan the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice court case application against Israel within the next 2 months after the 7th of October. So, on October the 7th, 2023, Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups launched a large-scale coordinated attack on Israel, which marked the deadliest assault on Israeli soil since the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The attack was dubbed Operation Al-Aqsa Flood by Hamas, and it initiated the ongoing Gaza war and had profound regional repercussions. I read an article recently by Paula Sleer, which basically indicated that something ridiculous was happening in America. And that was that someone called Justin Lewis from an organization called CACISA was spearheading a $400 million legal suit against Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC and the South African government. And I just had to talk to Justin about Paula's article, or rather the contents of the article, specifically in relation to the lawsuit. Justin, it's an absolute privilege and it's a pleasure chatting to you today. Thank you so much at very short notice for agreeing to join me.
No problem. We need to make some corrections there. I'm not bringing any lawsuit against anybody, but I am in contact with parties that are intending to.
Now, this interview deals with two separate but interconnected legal cases. The first legal case is the corruption of the International Criminal Court by Cyril Ramaphosa, by South Africa's Department of International Relations, and by Hamas. And the accusation here is collusion before the 7th of October. The second legal case is an action by victims of terror in the United States against Cyril Ramaphosa personally for $400 million. In case one, which is about the corruption of the International Criminal Court by Cyril Ramaphosa, DIRCO, and Hamas, the question is, did Cyril Ramaphosa, our South African Department of International Relations, and Hamas meet before the 7th of October to plan launching a case with the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice after the 7th of October?
So my role as CACISA, as a lobby group whose purpose is the prevention of the corruption of courts, that's our focus. Spinning off from that and different issues, as we'll discuss now, barriers to litigation for those involved in assisting or aiding and abetting terrorism have been lifted in the US as a result of a recent legal ruling by the US Supreme Court, unanimous, allowing for victims of terror to be sued in the United States, which significantly simplifies the ability for victims of terrorism in gaining recourse to justice.
So before we get to the merits of the case, or at least the merits of the movement that you're involved in the US, who is Justin Lewis?
I've been involved with prevention of court corruption for over 20 years. It began initially with a matter where Lloyds of London and I were victims of alleged insurance fraud, and the courts were used in that exercise. So I finished a report for them in 2017, which I submitted to the FCA in London. From there, I was asked to look at another case, which is ongoing in Jersey for the legalization of international money laundering. using corruption of courts. And from those engagements, various parties, for example, there was the Glencore scandal that I was asked to look into, where the US Department of Justice and the UK Serious Fraud Office achieved a 1.2 billion claim against them for corruption. My involvement there included instructions from the SFO Office UK to engage the South African government on the issues pertaining thereto. And so on each of these involvements, again, emphasizing our focus is on the prevention of the corruption of courts.
In South Africa, and I imagine the world at large, there seems to be a well-oiled machine in public media spaces dealing with people like you. In South Africa, we've got a similar kind of set of activities against local whistleblowers. But the reality is that the media seems to be particularly well-heeled when it comes to being able to not necessarily demonize a person like yourself, but ridicule a person like yourself as almost a Don Quixote who's really tilting at windmills left, right, and center with very little effect and impact. I don't really want to know how that affects you. But I really do want to know. I want to try and delve into why that machine seems to be so well heeled around the world and is so reactive as quickly as it is to kicking into action, into gear in terms of this demonization activity of people who are prepared to come out like yourself.
It doesn't affect me at all. It's not going to change an iota of what's coming down the road. My involvement here through many different clients gives me an advantage, particularly because I'm based in Scotland, and Scotland right now is at the heart of the Trump empire as far as international relations. In fact, he might be visiting here in Scotland next week. And with that comes a whole lot of questions. That's the one thing about Trump. The other thing about Trump is he likes golf. And if you want to meet today all the who's who of Washington and the US security systems and anybody to do with Trump, you'll find them here in Scotland playing golf.
On the golf course.
On golf course. As it has been through centuries. I think the most important political and economic decisions have often been made on golf courses. But yes, I'm often asked, for my opinion, often asked, what is the situation in South Africa? What is the history of South Africa? From people that have no idea of how to understand South Africa. And it's through these questions that one gets an indication of the mood, international, particularly in America, and the Trump establishment of where they're going. And why is that important? Well, it's not important to CACISA, other than the corruption of courts. Now, when I was asked in 2023 to engage the South African government from the Serious Fraud Office in the UK, witnesses came forward confirming that the ICC application brought into 2023, I think it was a month after the attack, and by December, which is 2 months later, the ICJ application was brought against Israel by South Africa, and the mere common sense of it, of the speed of those applications indicated, and further confirmed, we believe, by witnesses, that the application had been prepared before the attack.
This bears emphasizing. According to Justin Lewis, in 2023, witnesses that have come before him have testified that the International Criminal Court and later the International Court of Justice applications by South Africa to the International Court of Justice had been prepared before the 7th of October 2023, before the October the 7th attacks on Israel. I just want to make that very, very clear. What you're saying is that the ultimate application to the ICJ was prepared before the 7th of October 2023.
Absolutely. And that is my domain, which is corruption of international courts, because courts per se, but particularly in this case, international courts, because it indicates that through a relationship between Hamas and the South African government, and the finger keeps being pointed to a section of the South African government, namely the Foreign Affairs Department, DIRCO, that there was an intended decision made to approach the international court to promote what can only be seen as a Hamas political agenda. In other words, create the crisis, see the result and the suffering that goes with it, and then apply to court for a genocide application. Now, you can't do that in law. You cannot approach a court with what is referred to as dirty hands. What you're doing is you're utilizing an international court to cynically advance in a political agenda by creating it. I described it in the past as helping your neighbor to burn down his house and then rushing to court to claim insurance relief. It's just not going to work.
At that time in 2023, Naledi Pandor was in charge of DIRCO. She was the minister in charge of essentially directing DIRCO activities. And just to be very, very clear, from what you're saying and from what I'm understanding, you're saying that people like Justice Dugard, for example, who was one of the prominent lawyers that took this case to the ICJ, must have known before the 7th of October to be able to place this case before the ICJ and plan to place this case before the ICJ, must have known before the 7th of October, had prior warning before the 7th of October, that the 7th of October would be happening, that the response would be elicited from the Israeli government, and so therefore was in a position to place this before the ICJ.
Absolutely. That's the only conclusion one can make. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. All we do know, and if I know, I can assure you, the other intelligence units in the US and in Israel, I mean, if they could blow up Hamas's phones, they certainly knew what were on their phones. What I'm saying is that there's intelligence out there confirming the allegation that a conspiracy existed. Now that's very important, because it not only directs the future of the ICJ and the ICC applications, but it feeds into the American argument, which is what they and their intelligence confirm in the sense of their approach to this matter. They are vehemently opposed to the ICJ and the ICC applications, as expressed in the sanctions and actions that they've taken. But what South Africa and you know, what I was amazed that last week, a couple of days ago, the Hague Group met in Colombia again with their program, asking for action against Israel and the Gaza conflict, and being very anti-American. Well, the Americans that I deal with are very clear to me. They will not stand for the murder of Americans, and they will hold people that were involved accountable. Now, these aren't just words. The Promoting Security and Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act in Parliament has been part. In fact, there is an executive order by President Trump. I think it's Order 14204, and it's addressing hostile and anti-Semitic conduct by the Republic of South Africa. You can't be clearer than that. Now, that is American policy at the moment, and we can see it being acted out. Now, often the intelligence that I get, and it's normally quite up to date, gives me some advance warning of what's happening. Now, the Hague Group, led by Ramaphosa as chairman, and Colombia, the president of Colombia, are arguing anti-American stance-based, but are saying that they're involved because they want to defend the international rule of law. But the application in the evidence of planning the ICJ application prior to the attack does completely the opposite. It undermines the international rule of law. So you've got this contradiction that they do not understand. That's the one point. The other point is that American policy, the danger is, once one understands more the questions that I get about South Africa, because I am a dual national and I'm an honorary citizen of America. So I have access to different parties, and I'm not an Israeli. I'm a Church of England Christian with a long history in South Africa with Desmond Tutu as a personal family friend. My family has a 300-year history in South Africa, so that's why they ask me questions. Now, on the basis of our focus of CACISA, which is anti-corruption, prevention of corruption of courts, this is well in our domain. So that is why witnesses approached me. Now, President Ramaphosa's name keeps popping up here because he led the ICJ condemnation of Israel when it first began. He is the chairman of the Hague Group, which is seen to be opposed to the American agenda, and is a strong supporter of the ICJ application. Now, I don't know who's going to bring this application regarding the ICJ, but one will be brought sooner or later. I believed that will present this evidence to the ICJ and have it struck off. Not on the grounds and the merits of the application, but on the grounds of the technicality of the process of the application.
But that's in relation to the matter before the ICJ. And let me be very clear about something. I'm not hearing you saying that the ICJ was in any way complicit in this matter.
No, I've seen no evidence of that regard. It appears that they were played, and good and properly played.
But the $400 million suit is not the suit before the ICJ. That is a completely separate event, right? Now, the second case being brought is a personal lawsuit by American victims of Hamas terror against Cyril Ramaphosa for his actions in conspiring with Hamas before the 7th of October 2023. This action is against him personally for $400 million. Let's
just focus on the issue of Ramaphosa. Why Ramaphosa and why $400 million? Well, the old South African government, before the elections in 2024, I think it was represented by Ramaphosa. Then you had the elections and you had the government of national unity being formed. Now, that government of national unity at the moment has other parties involved, including the DA and the Freedom Front and others. In other words, the ANC, whose DIRCO department is linked to the allegations of corruption of the ICJ, is not the government in power right now. Now, the only commonality in the past and the present is Ramaphosa, because he was president then and he's president now. Not only that, his statements are often seen as chairman of the Hague Group as anti-American. Now, recently, and I'm saying this is weeks away, actions are being taken, and you can see the machinations beginning within Washington without having to be a insider in the promoting security and justice of victims of terrorism. In Israel, you can see the compensation for terror victims bill that they passed. And there are cases already by victims of terrorism underway, in place in New York. The question is, the direction that I see it going, far as South Africa is concerned, is these actions have been taken in support of President Trump's executive order. And that order purpose is in addressing hostile and anti-Semitic conduct by the Republic of South Africa, leaves President Ramaphosa front and center. Now, the 400 million is the estimate of his entire worth. And as these actions are beginning to take place and are taking place, it is my prediction that this is where it's going to end.
I want to come back to the issue at hand here, which is the accusation that a group of people, including Cyril Ramaphosa, including Justice John Dugard, conspired before the 7th of October to be bringing an action to the ICJ after the 7th of October, after the Israeli response, etc., etc., etc. What would you say, and I know you don't have facts at hand, but what would you say would have been the primary motivation for this cabal to act as it did in terms of your allegation?
And I want to state this on record. I've got no knowledge or link or any evidence that I've seen anything to do with Duga. But what I will say that the purpose of it was to create a situation where Israel could be then held to account for what was to follow, and we've seen what's followed. I had this brief with the Archbishop of Canterbury because he's my senior, where the question was, he came out saying that anything that the ICJ deems fitting should be applied to without conscience. Well, what happens if the application was fake to begin with? You have to bring that allegation out of the current situation. If it's tainted with conspiracy to deceive the international court, then you're undermining the entire purpose. But again, going back to Ramaphosa, Ramaphosa is just one issue. It's not just Ramaphosa and a suit that he is now exposed to. It's the fact that the South African government will one, as part of my experience and the people that I talk to from the American establishment, is the sanctions on South African debt. The effect of that could add, as I've said in the past, according to information given to me, and as advised, increase the cost of South Africa servicing its debt. So that's got a real reality to the taxpayer, South African taxpayer, because the bill of paying for the interest on South African government's debt will quadruple overnight. And that's where these acts that I see being passed in the US appear to be aimed at, to give empower for the UK and the US administration to do exactly that. And when I say South African government debt, you must remember that South African banks also hold South African government debt. If the US imposes these sanctions, they'll have to release that debt. Otherwise, they will not be able to operate in the UK and the EU and the US. Their licenses, their charters will be removed. There are implications and beyond just the significance of what we're discussing that don't bear thinking about. Yeah.
Something beyond altruism must have been motivating Ramaphosa, the ICJ team from South Africa, the journalists, particularly the 702 journalists that had a very steady campaign of anti-Israel rhetoric from, in fact, before the 7th of October. Something must have been motivating these people to act in concert. And there's no doubt in my mind, and conventional wisdom in South Africa has it amongst the people I talk to, that the motivation was Iran, and the motivation was Iranian money, in principle, not to Ramaphosa necessarily, but certainly through to the ANC, that caused this cavalcade of action from this group of people acting in concert. Do you have any view on that in terms of what the primary motivation was and continues to be of these people having such an anti-Israel rhetoric?
Well, it's state capture all over again, isn't it? Instead of the Guptas, now you've got the Iranians. I think South Africa's seen all this before. What you're saying, yes, absolutely, has huge credibility. In fact, cynical as well, because the implication of it is that they're being bought.
But I suppose the question is not so much tell us the evidence, tell us there's a smoking gun.
Oh, yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And you must understand that the smoking gun adage, it will not be so forcefully supported by American actions that are happening now if it didn't exist.
Right.
It would have been dismissed a long time ago. So they know what we know and a lot more. And the same applies to Mossad and they work in lockstep. The US and the Israeli intelligence. There was a arrangement, and that's what makes them so angry, because that arrangement resulted in the deaths of American lives, and that's not going to pass the radar. They're going to come after those people come hell or high water, whether it's through the ICJ or sanctions against it, and anybody that's in that path is going to get thumped on these issues of agendas being force-fed into the media to create anti-Israeli sentiments and anti-American sentiments that have had enough. And that's why you will see Trump being Trump and being enforcing so many of what normally would be considered as diplomatic no-nos. But they're angry. And that's what I don't see in the press anywhere. This expression of the truth behind the fact that Americans are angry, and they're angry for good reason, because you murdered some of their citizens. Now they're going to come for you.
Justin, I just want to, first of all, it's a privilege meeting you. And I understand the kind of pressure someone in your position must be in, irrespective of your being able to, wipe it off your shoulder and say it doesn't impact or affect you. I imagine it must impact and affect you. As a South African who is obviously a loyal South African, I really want to thank you for your service, because I don't think anybody else is going to do that. The reality is it's a privilege meeting you. I'm very interested in what you have to say, and I hope we can chat again, retroactively looking back at possible things which might happen over the next couple of months. I think, coming from a legal background myself, what you are revealing about the abuse of the ICJ it's jaw-dropping. It is something I don't think anyone could have anticipated. The reality is, if it's anything close to the truth, it is a devastation of the loyalty and faith that South Africans have shown, not only in the ANC, but in Ramaphosa in particular. And certainly, I would imagine it's something which may have to end up in The Hague on its own merits eventually, because you're certainly not going to do it justice here in South Africa, having an action against Ramaphosa for the abuse of the legal system. Thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with your golf next week with Trump.
Right. Thank you, Ivan.
Thanks, Justin. Keep well. Bye-bye.